There's a kind of power that doesn't shout. It doesn't pound its chest or storm into a room demanding attention. Instead, it watches, it listens, it waits, and when it moves, it does so like a shadow, silent, deliberate, nearly invisible. This kind of power is not measured in brute force or loud victories, but in subtle influence, timing, and the art of perception. It's not the power we fantasize about in movies, but the power that actually shapes the real world. Quietly, persistently. You've likely felt it before. In a workplace where someone who rarely speaks somehow controls the direction of every meeting. In a friend group where one person's opinions always become the group consensus, even though they never argue. Or perhaps in your own life, where you felt unseen despite speaking the loudest, or found yourself manipulating without even knowing it. What exactly is this force we dance around every day? And what does it mean to hold power, not just over others, but over your own life? That question has haunted humanity for centuries, and few thinkers captured its raw essence quite like Niccolò Machiavelli. Born in 1469, this Florentine diplomat and political theorist has long been associated with manipulation, cunning, and ruthless strategy. His name alone often conjures up a particular image: the cold schemer, the power-hungry manipulator, the puppet master behind the throne. But is that really all he was? And more importantly, was he wrong? In a world where influence is currency and attention the new empire, Machiavelli's teachings are not relics. They are roadmaps. He lived in a time of betrayal, shifting alliances, and fragile empires, yet what he observed cuts through to our own world, where the masks are digital, but the games are the same, where political correctness often hides quiet coercion, and where even kindness can be a tactic. But this script isn't about glorifying deceit or weaponizing charm. It's about understanding the nature of power as it really is, not as we wish it to be. It's about stepping out of naivety and into awareness. Because whether we like it or not, power dynamics shape our relationships, our careers, and even our sense of self. To pretend otherwise is to walk through a battlefield blindfolded. So we turn to Machiavelli, not as a villain, but as a mirror. And through his lens, we begin to see the structures we live in, the games we're playing, and the moves we never realized we were making. What does it mean to be powerful in the modern world? Is it manipulation or mastery, control or clarity? And can power ever coexist with morality, with empathy, with truth? Let's begin. To understand the art of power, we must first understand its architect, or rather, its most infamous philosopher. Niccolò Machiavelli was born into a time of crisis. Florence, once a hub of art and intellect, was tangled in corruption, foreign invasions, and internal betrayals. Italy was not yet a unified nation, but a collection of fragile city-states, each one fighting for dominance, survival, or both. It was a world where power didn't belong to the most righteous, but to the most adaptable. And it was in this crucible of chaos that Machiavelli's ideas took shape. His most famous work, The Prince, was written not as a lofty philosophical treatise, but as a brutally honest guide for rulers, one that dared to describe the world not as it should be, but as it actually is. Machiavelli shattered the idealism of his time. He wasn't interested in the virtues espoused by the church or the romanticized notions of kingship. He was interested in results, survival, stability, influence. He asked a dangerous question: what if being good isn't enough? What if the pursuit of virtue without the presence of strategy only invites ruin? This question was so uncomfortable, so raw in its clarity, that Machiavelli was quickly branded a cynic. Even today, the word Machiavellian evokes images of manipulation, cold calculation, and betrayal. But to stop there would be to misunderstand him entirely. Machiavelli wasn't advocating evil. He was documenting reality. He saw human beings not as angels or demons, but as conflicted, self-interested, and full of contradictions. His genius was in his refusal to look away from that truth. In The Prince, he writes, "A man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil." It's not a call to abandon morality. It's a warning. Morality, without wisdom, without the ability to adapt, without the power to defend itself, is vulnerable. This harsh realism wasn't born in a vacuum. Power has always fascinated philosophers, prophets, and emperors. In ancient China, Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, a text that taught leaders to win battles through strategy, deception, and timing. Less about brute strength, more about foresight. In India, the Arthashastra attributed to Kautilya was a manual for statecraft that echoed many of Machiavelli's principles centuries before he was born. That a ruler must be both lion and fox, feared and respected idealistic in vision but pragmatic in action. Even the ancient Greeks weren't strangers to the complex dance of power. Thucydides, writing about the Peloponnesian War, observed how power corrupts and how fear, honor, and self-interest often trump ideals. Plato envisioned philosopher kings, but his own student, Aristotle, leaned toward practical governance, acknowledging that political power is always shaped by those who wield it, and how well they understand human nature. Fast forward to the medieval church, where power was spiritual but no less political. The popes, while preaching humility, often maneuvered like kings, orchestrating crusades, excommunications, and alliances. Their moral authority masked a deeply strategic engagement with worldly power. Machiavelli saw this firsthand and drew the conclusion that appearances often matter more than substance. A ruler may do what is necessary behind closed doors, but in public he must wear the cloak of virtue. In this light, Machiavelli wasn't teaching us how to deceive. He was forcing us to confront how easily we are deceived. He wasn't undermining morality. He was pointing out its fragility in a world where perception often outweighs principle. That makes his insights deeply relevant in today's world, where curated identities on social media, political branding, and corporate diplomacy all rely on the subtle wielding of influence. But what has changed since Machiavelli's time? In some ways, very little. The faces of power have evolved, but the mechanics remain eerily similar. Where once a prince relied on military alliances and familial ties, today's leaders depend on media narratives, psychological strategies, and public relations. The language is different, less about dominance, more about vision and influence, but the goals are the same: control, survival, direction. One critical difference, however, lies in the democratization of influence. In Machiavelli's day, power was concentrated in the hands of the few. Today, influence is accessible to nearly anyone with a phone, a platform, or a persuasive voice. The rise of influencers, thought leaders, and viral figures has created a new kind of battlefield, one where charisma and narrative can outpace institutions and hierarchies. This shift hasn't made Machiavelli obsolete. If anything, it's made his observations more urgent. Because now, the princes aren't just kings and presidents, they're CEOs, content creators, activists, and everyday people learning to navigate systems larger than themselves. What remains constant is the tension between what is effective and what is ethical. Machiavelli asked, "Is it better to be feared or loved?" The modern world reframes the question. Is it better to be authentic or strategic? Can you lead with kindness without being dismissed as weak? Can you express vulnerability without inviting exploitation? These are not hypothetical dilemmas. They are the daily inner negotiations of anyone who seeks to lead, influence, or simply survive in a competitive world. And yet, despite the centuries, we still recoil from these truths. We cling to the belief that good intentions should be enough. We want to believe that if we are honest, kind, and hardworking, recognition and success will follow. But Machiavelli's world, and ours, suggests otherwise. Without understanding the dynamics of power, we risk becoming pawns in games we don't even know we're playing. This is not a call to abandon your values. It's a call to arm them with awareness, to realize that morality, stripped of power, is fragile, and power, stripped of morality, is dangerous. The balance between the two is not easily struck, but it is essential. And perhaps that's where Machiavelli becomes not just a political theorist, but a psychological guide. He invites us to see clearly, to act wisely, and to engage with the world as it is, not with fear, but with courage, to see power not as something to worship or fear, but as something to understand. Because only when we understand it can we choose how to use it, or refuse to. Power is not merely a political force. It is a psychological one, shaped in the mind long before it ever manifests in the world. When we talk about Machiavelli and the art of power, we're not just talking about strategy in courtrooms or boardrooms. We're talking about the architecture of influence that begins in childhood, the subtle games played in families, schools, and relationships. The pursuit of control, security, approval, these are not foreign concepts. They are the very fabric of our personal lives. From a psychological standpoint, power is deeply intertwined with our sense of self. It touches on autonomy, agency, and the fundamental human need to feel effective in the world. According to self-determination theory, a psychological framework developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, humans have three core psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When we feel powerless, we often feel that our autonomy is restricted, our competence is doubted, or our relationships are not secure. In that sense, power is not about domination, it's about wholeness. But how we seek power, and what kind of power we seek, is shaped by our internal narratives. A child who grows up in a chaotic household may learn that control equals safety. A teenager who feels invisible may develop a charisma that becomes their shield. A professional who constantly doubts their worth might chase status not for its pleasures, but for the silence it brings to their inner critic. Power, then, becomes a coping mechanism, a survival tool, a way to assert order in a world that often feels indifferent. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, believed that the shadow, the repressed unconscious part of the psyche, often carries within it a hunger for power that society teaches us to suppress. In his view, many people deny their ambition, their desire to influence, or their capacity for manipulation. But that denial doesn't erase the drive. It distorts it. It pushes it underground, where it becomes passive aggression, self-sabotage, or even self-righteousness cloaked in moral superiority. Jung argued that true maturity requires integrating the shadow, acknowledging the dark potentials within us, and choosing how to wield them consciously. This is where Machiavelli and Jung unexpectedly meet. Both understood that pretending to be purely good is a dangerous fantasy. Both warned against naivete, and both, in their own way, suggested that understanding one's own darkness is essential to becoming a whole, powerful human being. But power also operates at a social level, where group dynamics, roles, and hierarchies influence how we behave. Social psychologists like Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo revealed unsettling truths about obedience and authority. In Milgram's experiments, ordinary people were willing to administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to strangers, simply because someone in a lab coat told them to. In Zimbardo's infamous prison experiment, participants assigned the role of guards quickly began abusing their prisoners, not because they were inherently cruel, but because the situation allowed, even encouraged, a distortion of power. These studies highlight something crucial, that power is not only about who we are, it is also about the systems we are in. Given the right or wrong conditions, nearly anyone is capable of misuse. Machiavelli would not have been surprised by these findings. He knew that people are not as moral as they wish to be, and that institutions often reflect the worst as much as the best in us. Yet the modern world complicates this further. Social media, for example, creates a new type of power: visibility. The ability to capture attention has become as valuable as money or political influence. But this attention-based power is volatile. It can be given and taken overnight. It is shaped by algorithms, not wisdom, and it often rewards performance over substance. This creates a peculiar psychological trap. In our attempts to be seen, to be followed, to be heard, we may begin to curate versions of ourselves that are optimized for approval, not authenticity. We become actors in a play directed by public opinion, losing our sense of who we are outside of validation. Power, then, becomes addictive. And like any addiction, it breeds anxiety, insecurity, and fear of loss. Erich Fromm, a 20th century psychoanalyst and philosopher, distinguished between two kinds of power: power over and power to. The former is about domination, controlling others, manipulating outcomes. The latter is about capacity, the ability to create, to influence meaningfully, to express one's true self. Fromm believed that healthy power lies in the second kind. It is not coercive, but generative. It does not diminish others. It elevates them. This distinction mirrors a spiritual truth echoed in many ancient traditions. In Sufism, for example, the nafs, the egoic self, is seen as the source of our need to dominate, compete, and manipulate. Yet the path to spiritual awakening is not to destroy the nafs, but to purify it. The Sufi doesn't deny the desire for influence, but transmutes it into service, compassion, and insight. Power is not eliminated, it is redefined. The Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text, also speaks to this balance. Arjuna, a warrior prince, hesitates to fight in a battle where he must face his own kin. Krishna, his guide, tells him, "You have a right to your actions, but not to the fruits of your actions." It is a call to act with courage and clarity, not attachment. True power in this worldview lies in right action, not in the result, not in the control, but in the alignment with deeper truth. And yet most of us live far from this ideal. We are conditioned by fears of rejection, inadequacy, and irrelevance. We hide our ambitions behind humility or mask our insecurities with dominance. We may manipulate without knowing it, guilt-tripping a partner, withholding praise from a colleague, performing virtue to win approval. Power, in these cases, is unconscious. It leaks from our wounds. This is why self-awareness is the first form of power. To know your motives, to question your reactions, to notice when you're using charm as a shield, silence as a weapon, or kindness as currency. The person who understands their own patterns has more power than the one who blindly climbs hierarchies without insight. So, where does this leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads. One path leads to external power, status, titles, influence, but often at the cost of authenticity. The other path begins within. It is quieter, slower, but ultimately more sustainable. It asks us to become aware of our own shadow, our own hungers, our own games. It asks us to choose power not for control, but for growth. And maybe that's what Machiavelli never got to say, because the world wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe The Prince wasn't just a manual for rulers. Maybe it was a mirror for the rest of us, to see the world not through the lens of who we wish to be, but who we actually are. And from that honesty, to begin again, not as manipulators but as conscious players in the dance of life. To study power is to study pain. Not always the sharp, violent kind of pain we read about in history books, the assassinations, the betrayals, the collapses of empires. No, this is the quieter pain, the emotional erosion of the self in a world where power is misunderstood, misused, or entirely denied. When we don't understand how power works, within us and around us, we often suffer in ways that feel deeply personal, even though they are shaped by collective dynamics. Let's begin with the most intimate space, the self. When a person is disconnected from their sense of inner power, they live in a constant state of negotiation. Every decision, every emotion, every ambition must pass through the filter of external permission. You see it in the man who constantly asks for approval before speaking his mind, in the woman who downplays her success so others won't feel threatened, in the employee who never asks for a raise, convinced they haven't earned the right. These are not just personality quirks. They are symptoms of an internalized disempowerment. And it begins early. Children absorb the power dynamics of their environment long before they understand the words to describe them. If a child grows up in a household where power is wielded through fear, they may learn that silence equals safety. If love is conditional, based on obedience or performance, they may come to believe that their worth is something to be earned, not something inherent. Later in life, this shows up as self-doubt, perfectionism, or people-pleasing. Power, in this context, is no longer a tool. It becomes a threat. And so we either avoid it, fearing its abuse, or chase it, desperate to never feel powerless again. This is where emotional consequences unfold. People who reject power altogether often end up bitter. They believe the world is unfair, and it is, but they've chosen to remain spectators rather than participants. On the other hand, those who pursue power without introspection often become trapped by it. Their self-worth becomes tethered to status, control, or influence. They cannot rest unless they are on top. They cannot love unless they dominate. They cannot lose without unraveling. The tragedy is that both paths, avoidance and obsession, lead to suffering. And this suffering is rarely confined to the self. It spills into our relationships. When power is misunderstood, intimacy becomes a battleground. One partner may exert subtle dominance through guilt, while the other resists through emotional withdrawal. A boss may unconsciously replicate the controlling behavior of their own parents, expecting obedience instead of creativity. Even friendships can become transactional, where generosity is used as leverage, and vulnerability becomes ammunition. In these spaces, power doesn't disappear. It distorts. And when entire groups misunderstand power, societies fracture. You can see it in political polarization, where each side believes itself morally superior, yet neither is willing to relinquish control. You see it in corporate cultures, where innovation dies under layers of hierarchy and fear. You see it in activism that begins with justice and ends in domination. Everywhere, the failure to consciously engage with power leads to division, not progress. This is not a new phenomenon. Throughout history, we've seen what happens when the pursuit of power becomes untethered from reflection. Consider the fall of Julius Caesar, a man who won the people but lost the Senate. He centralized power, believing himself the savior of Rome, only to be assassinated by those who feared tyranny. Or look at Robespierre, a revolutionary who fought for liberty in France but became a symbol of terror and purges. He began with idealism, but ended in blood. Even in more modern times, leaders who begin with vision often fall victim to their own unchecked ambition. The story repeats again and again. Those who gain power but fail to evolve are eventually consumed by it. Yet we are often drawn to power for the very reason it frightens us, because it offers the illusion of control in an uncontrollable world. We want to believe that if we have enough status, enough followers, enough money, enough security, we will finally be safe. But, as Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, observed, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure, and often they distract themselves with power too, or the appearance of it. This is the spiritual consequence of misunderstood power. It numbs the soul. It replaces connection with strategy, purpose with performance. It convinces us that we must climb over others to be seen, when in reality, what we truly desire is to be known, to be respected not for our titles, but for our truth. But truth without power often goes unheard, and power without truth becomes hollow. So we settle for one or the other, and call it a life. But this doesn't have to be the end of the story. The consequences of powerlessness and misuse are real, yes, but they are also invitations, signals, calls to consciousness. When we notice the cost of our strategies, the loneliness of manipulation, the exhaustion of performative success, the ache of invisibility, we are given a choice to keep playing unconscious games, or to learn a new way. This is where the personal revolution begins, because when a person truly reclaims their power, not by dominating but by aligning, they become unshakable, not arrogant, not cruel, just steady. A person like this can walk into a room and not need to be the loudest voice. They don't seek attention, but they command respect. They don't manipulate others into action. They inspire them. And they don't fear change because their power is not rooted in control, but in clarity. Think of the quiet confidence of a therapist who holds space for another pain without needing to fix it, or the teacher who empowers students to question rather than simply obey, or the parent who apologizes when wrong, modeling strength through humility. These are not traditional images of power, but they are transformative. They shift culture. They shape generations. They begin with self-awareness and ripple outward. This is the Machiavellian paradox, that while the prince teaches rulers to appear virtuous to maintain power, the deeper truth is that real, lasting power must eventually be rooted in authenticity. Otherwise, it collapses. We live in a time where many of our institutions are being questioned. Governments, schools, workplaces, media. Trust is eroding. But within this erosion is opportunity. If we, as individuals and communities, can redefine power, not as control over others but as alignment with our deepest values, then perhaps the next stage of leadership will be less about domination and more about integration. Perhaps power can become not a tool for conquest, but a path to wisdom. And perhaps the greatest consequence of all is that, once awakened to the truth of power, we can no longer pretend to be powerless. We can no longer blame the world for our silence. We can no longer hide behind the comfort of helplessness. Because now we know. And knowing carries weight, but it also carries hope. If power can corrupt, it can also liberate. If it can break, it can also heal. The question is not whether you should seek power, but how and why. What are you really reaching for when you want to be seen, heard, respected, obeyed, or followed? Beneath all the strategies, the subtle manipulations, the hunger for dominance, there's often a deeper need. To feel safe, to feel free, to feel worthy. The path to healthy power, then, is not about acquiring more control over others. It's about cultivating control over your own inner world. The journey begins within. Let's begin with the most essential practice of all, self-awareness. This isn't a vague suggestion to know yourself, but a concrete invitation to track your internal power dynamics. Start by noticing where, in your daily life, you give your power away. Is it when you remain silent in meetings, even when you have something valuable to say? Is it when you let guilt drive your decisions in relationships? Or when you spend hours scrolling through social media, unconsciously absorbing other people's standards? You can begin by journaling at the end of each day. Where did I feel powerful today? Where did I feel powerless? Was I trying to control something or someone? Why? Did I allow someone else to influence me in ways that didn't feel aligned? These questions are not about self-judgment. They are tools for self-liberation. Another essential tool is boundaries. Psychologically, boundaries are where your identity begins and ends. Without them, you become porous, absorbing the needs, emotions, and agendas of others. This is especially common for those who were conditioned to be nice rather than authentic. Setting boundaries does not mean being harsh. It means being clear. It means recognizing that your energy, time, and focus are sacred. Every time you say no to something that drains you, you say yes to your own power. Every time you choose honesty over appeasement, you step into maturity. But setting boundaries requires emotional regulation. If you cannot tolerate discomfort, like someone's disappointment, anger, or rejection, you will collapse back into people-pleasing or over-control. This is why cultivating emotional strength is foundational. One of the most effective ways to build this resilience is through mindfulness meditation. It allows you to observe your reactions without becoming them. When you can sit with your fear, your envy, your desire to dominate or retreat, without immediately acting, you gain freedom. Freedom to choose your response. Freedom to lead yourself. But power is not just about what you resist. It's also about what you build. This is where vision becomes vital. People who lack a personal vision are far more likely to be manipulated by someone else's. They become followers not by choice, but by default. Power requires direction. You must know what you stand for, what matters to you, what you are creating, not just avoiding. So ask yourself, what does success mean to me, beyond status? If I didn't fear judgment or failure, what would I pursue? What kind of influence do I want to have on others, not just what kind I want from them? Write your answers, revisit them, refine them. Power without clarity becomes chaos. Power with clarity becomes leadership. And remember, you do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to be famous. You do not have to outshine others. In fact, one of the most potent forms of power is the ability to uplift, to create space for others, to inspire trust, not fear. This is why assertiveness training, especially for those who struggle with passivity or people-pleasing, is a deeply empowering practice. Assertiveness is not aggression. It is the courage to express your thoughts, needs, and boundaries respectfully but firmly. When you practice assertiveness, you stop leaking power through silence, sarcasm, or resentment. You become clean in your expression, clear in your presence. Incorporate these into your daily life. Practice saying no without over-explaining. Ask for what you need directly. Speak your truth even when your voice shakes. Over time, you will notice that people respond differently to you, not because they've changed, but because you have stopped performing powerlessness. Yet, as you rise into your own strength, remember this. Power is not a solo journey. We are relational beings. We exist in systems, families, teams, communities. That's why the final layer of mature power is ethical stewardship, the ability to hold power without abusing it, to influence without controlling, to lead without exploiting. You can develop this by studying servant leadership, a model that puts empathy, listening, and service at the core of influence, or by exploring Stoic philosophy, which teaches that true power lies in mastering oneself, not others. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and Stoic, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." It's also helpful to reflect on Sufi teachings, which emphasize humility, surrender, and divine trust. In this view, power is not owned, it is borrowed, a gift to be used in service of love, not the ego. The Sufi path invites you to purify your intentions, to let go of outcomes, and to act from the heart. It teaches that the most powerful person is the one who has nothing to prove and everything to give. And finally, learn to forgive yourself for the ways you have misused power in the past, or failed to claim it. We've all manipulated, avoided, performed. That's not weakness, it's survival. But now that you see clearly, you can choose differently. That is your real power. So if you want to step into a new relationship with power, begin with these daily practices. Journal your power dynamics honestly. Meditate to create space between emotion and reaction. Set boundaries where you've stayed silent. Speak with clarity, not apology. Act from vision, not fear. Serve, but do not sacrifice your self-respect. Reflect continuously with compassion, not self-judgment. You are not here to dominate. You are not here to disappear. You are here to embody, to influence with integrity, to lead your own life before you ever try to lead others. In doing so, you honor not just yourself, but the generations of people, past and future, who will be shaped by the way you hold your power. As we conclude this exploration of power, we are left with a simple yet profound truth. Power is not something to be feared, nor something to be worshipped. It is something to be understood and embodied. It is a force that runs through every decision we make, every relationship we nurture, and every goal we pursue. Yet, the way we relate to it, whether consciously or unconsciously, determines whether it serves us or enslaves us. Machiavelli's insights were grounded in a world that was chaotic, where power was often the difference between life and death. His The Prince still offers lessons on the mechanics of power, but what he left out, and what we must now bring to the forefront, is the idea that power, when wielded consciously, can be a tool for transformation, not just domination. To live with power is to live with responsibility. The moment we understand the inner mechanics of power, where it arises from within us, how it interacts with others, and how it shapes our identities, we take ownership of our role in the world. Power, in this light, becomes a path to integrity and authentic connection, not a shortcut to control or manipulation. This is where the real transformation begins. When we reclaim our power, we free ourselves from the old narratives of helplessness, fear, and inadequacy. We stop defining ourselves by what others think of us, by how many followers we have, or by how much we can accumulate. Instead, we begin to define ourselves by the quality of our presence, the clarity of our intentions, and the authenticity of our actions. But this journey is not a linear one. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when we forget our truth and fall back into old patterns. There will be times when the world tries to impose its definitions of power upon us. Yet each moment we choose to align with our inner power, we change the narrative, not just for ourselves, but for the collective. Perhaps the greatest gift we can give the world and ourselves is the ability to wield power with love, humility, and courage. As we walk this path, we begin to see that true power is not in having control over others, but in mastering the self, in acting with compassion, not manipulation, in choosing authenticity over performance. So, as you leave this exploration, ask yourself, how will you wield your power today? Not as a weapon, but as a tool for growth, connection, and contribution. And remember, power does not reside in domination. It resides in the choices you make to honor your own truth, while respecting the dignity and autonomy of others. The question remains, how will you lead? And, perhaps more importantly, how will you lead yourself? By embracing the complexity of power, by facing it honestly and with intention, we can move toward a future where power is not something that divides us, but something that unites us in the service of the greater good. And in doing so, we will have not just learned the art of power, we will have mastered the art of life. If you've resonated with this exploration of power, its complexities, its depths, and the personal growth it invites, then you know that true transformation begins with awareness. Power is a force that shapes our world, but it's how we relate to it that ultimately shapes our lives. This journey we've started together is just the beginning. It's about embracing a new perspective, one that allows you to claim your rightful place in the world, not by dominating others, but by aligning with your truest self. If you want to continue this deep dive into psychological insights, philosophical reflections, and the tools for living a life of purpose and power, then I invite you to join this growing community. Here, we are all on the same path of growth, understanding, and self-mastery. By subscribing, you'll not only gain access to more content like this, packed with thought-provoking ideas, practical tools, and emotional insights that help you step into your personal power, but you'll also be joining a space of like-minded individuals who are committed to creating positive change in their own lives and the world around them. We're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to uncover, from psychological principles that challenge the way we think about ourselves to ancient wisdom that's still profoundly relevant today. You'll receive exclusive content, deep dives into timeless ideas, and actionable steps that will empower you to shift your mindset and transform your approach to power, influence, and success. This isn't about quick fixes or empty promises. This is about real change, about unlocking the potential within you to become the person you've always been capable of being. And that starts with taking one small step today, hitting that subscribe button. When you do, you'll be automatically updated on new videos that dive even deeper into the ideas we've discussed today. You'll gain new perspectives and insights that empower you to live with intention and authenticity. And if you truly want to go further, if you're ready to take this knowledge and apply it to your daily life, be sure to engage with the community. Leave your comments, ask questions, share your reflections. I want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your challenges. Together, we'll explore what it means to embody power in a way that serves both our highest self and the collective good. So, take a moment. Ask yourself, do you want to keep learning? Do you want to keep growing? Do you want to be the person who leads with clarity, wisdom, and strength? If the answer is yes, then subscribing is the next step. Let's continue this journey. Let's create a world where power is a tool for good, not a means to control. I'm excited to walk alongside you in this exploration. We're in this together. The best is yet to come. Click that subscribe button now, and let ES start building a future where you can harness your full potential and live the life you deserve.